Welcome to today's installment of Four Winds on Wednesdays series. This is the third installment in our series, and we have a very special afternoon lined up for you today. Some wine tasting, some great music. It's going to be a great deal of fun. Thank you so much for joining us. And before we start this particular episode, I want to thank you for your kind attention to this series and the comments you've made, suggestions you've called in with, and we really appreciate hearing that. There have been actually hundreds of you who have watched this series, and we really appreciate it, along with the thousands of you who watched the Summer Sound series, which of course extended on into the fall and even into the winter time. So thank you so much for being a part of the LA Winds family with these series. And I also want to take just a moment to thank the dozens of you who contributed to our hugely successful matching grant program that was set up, where we were able to generate over $12,000 thanks to your generous support over the past several weeks. Thank you so much for doing that. It enables programs like this to continue, and also it enables us to plan for future events, the opening up of the concert series probably next fall. We're looking forward to getting back. And also we have some ideas for things that may take place in the summertime. I would urge all of you to stay safe and do your part to see what we can do to put this pandemic behind us as we move forward. Thank you again for all your help. Now we're in for a really exciting show today. I've selected a number of pieces to share with you, and they're kind of bookended by George Gershwin. As a matter of fact, the show is bookended by music by George Gershwin, and in between we'll have other songs, actually one that Joel Amromin is going to join us in that doesn't really have anything to do with George Gershwin, but it actually was first recorded within several years of the premiere of Porgy and Bess. And then at the end, we'll bring in Dale Underwood to perform something that we did in Chicago a number of years ago, a great rendition of some George Gershwin music. In between that, we'll also have some great wine tasting with our good friend Steve Wallishan and Scott Mendel. And Scott has brought along with him a terrific recording, a video of his Pacoima singers from Pacoima Middle School performing some music from the play Mary Poppins. So it should be quite an event today. Okay, so without further ado, I want to bring in a video that we made actually almost 3 years ago, a Valentine's Day video, and Valentine's Day is coming right up, in which we featured music that involved couples, Tristan and Isolde, Romeo and Juliet, and Porgy and Bess. And here you'll hear an excerpt from the musical Porgy and Bess, and then it'll turn to a beautiful, heart-wrenching version by Courtney Marsh of Summertime from Porgy and Bess. Isn't that just beautiful? That was Courtney Marsh, of course, and I know that many of you were there at that live performance, and it was really special, and I enjoyed sharing it with you again. And now we're going to bring on someone who has a somewhat different sounding voice. As a matter of fact, he's very well known for how much he enjoys singing and performing country music and Western music and folk music. So please join me as we welcome Joel Amromin to the show.
Thanks, Steve.
Welcome aboard.
It's a pleasure to be here. The song you're going to hear is called The Buffalo Skinners. This is a song that first appeared in John Lomax's collection in 1918. Talks about a crew of men hired in Jacksonboro, Texas to go buffalo hunting along the Pease River. But 10 years later, it was recollected by a guy named W.P. Webb as Bogus Creek. And it told the story of a bunch of cowboys who were hired out to drive cattle through the buffalo country. And it's funny because that version is the one that has stuck, but the Buffalo Skinners title is the one that remains, even though nobody's hunting buffalo. So here's the song. Enjoy. Come all you old-time cowboys, listen to my song. Please do not grow weary, I'll not detain you long. Concerning some wild cowboys who did agree to go spend the summer pleasant on the range of the buffalo. Well, I found myself in Griffin in 1883 when a man by the name of Creole come walking up to me saying, "How do you do, young fella, and how'd you like to go spend the summer pleasant on the range of the buffalo?" Well, me being out of work right then, to the drover I did say, "This going out on the buffalo range depends upon the pay. But if you pay good wages, transportation to and fro, I think I might go with you on the range of the buffalo." Well, yes, I pay good wages, transportation too, if you'll agree to work for me until the season's through. But if you do get homesick and you try to run away, you'll starve to death out on the trail. You'll also lose your pay. Well, with all this flattering talking, he signed up quite a train, some 10 or 12 in number of able-bodied men. Trip it was a pleasant one through all New Mexico until we crossed Pease River on the range of the buffalo. There our pleasures ended, our troubles all begun. A lightning storm came upon us, made the cattle run, and I got all full of stickers from the cactus that did grow, and outlaws waiting for to pick us off the hills of Mexico. Well, the working season ended. The drover would not pay. He said, "You spent your money, boys. You're all all in debt to me. But the cowboys never heard of a thing like a bankrupt law. So they left that bastard's bones to bleach on the range of the buffalo.
Well, thank you very much, Joel. It looks like the Cowboys did get their revenge after all. And before we toast to that revenge, we're not going to, of course, go into any kind of saloon like you might find on an old episode of Gunsmoke, but we will toast nonetheless. But before that, Joel, I was curious. I know you've done a number of things in your background in your life, both professionally and career-wise. What is it that sparked your interest to be such a significant part of the LA Winds family?
You. I actually was taking some of your music classes at Pierce, and I went to a few of your concerts of the LA Symphonic Winds, and I loved it. And you came up to me and said, Joel, how'd you like to be on our board? And I said, sure. And it's been that way ever since. I'm delighted to be involved with it. It's been quite a few years now.
Yes, indeed. And thank you so much. And what a great performance of that is. And thank you for those of you who are in the audience making comments. Be sure to send them in. We can always use that. And it's really helpful to us too. But thank you, Joel, for your contribution. Joel will be back later on in the show. But now I want to toast with those Cowboys who got their revenge on their master, if you will. And I want to bring on two of my very good friends, one who has been with the Los Angeles Symphonic Winds almost from the very beginning. As a matter of fact, when it was in the Pierce Band, he was drum major for the Pierce Band for a while. You've seen him in a number of pictures that I showed when I was talking about the history of the LA Symphonic Winds. And he's also quite a wine aficionado. So he's going to take us through some lessons in winery, if you will, and drinking it and whatnot. This is Steve Wallishin. Welcome, Steve. And we also have his good friend Scott Mandel. Scott, if you can join us now, terrific. Welcome aboard to the both of you. And at this point, I think what I'll be happy to do is hand it over to Steve, because I know you and Scott have been working together to give us an interesting demonstration today. I'll be in there a little later on, perhaps ask a couple of questions. But Steve, if you want to take over, that would be just great.
Thanks, Dave. We really appreciate that. We're really happy to be here. Scott and I have, in fact, done a tremendous amount of research on wine tasting, and we're happy to bring some of that experience back to you here today. I'm going to walk you through two wines today. We have a red wine and a white wine. We'll talk about tasting, and then Scott, I'll let Scott talk about what he's going to do, and then he's going to throw it back to me.
Well, Steve's going to show you the basics of how experts taste a wine, things you can do at home, and then I'll give you some great ideas about how to best pair wines with food. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Scott. Now, for today's show, unfortunately, we couldn't get several hundred bottles of wine ready to distribute. So we're going to ask the maestro to be the surrogate audience for today, and we've brought him a preview sample of the wine, so we're going to have him taste along with us, and we'll ask him for his opinion on your behalf. So I hope his palate is satisfactory for all of you. Like I said, we're going to talk about two wines today. The first one is a Chardonnay from a winery called La Crema. Some of you may know this. It's a Sonoma Coast wine. The grape is Chardonnay, and you want to serve white wines generally chilled. Now, not refrigerator cold. Probably between 40 and 50 degrees is best. And if you don't have a cooler that sits at 40 or 45 degrees, you can put it in the refrigerator for several hours and then take it out about a half hour before you want to serve it. So Chardonnays are known for being very well balanced between oakiness, if they're stored in oak, along with fruity notes like apple or pear, maybe honeydew melon, and a nice crisp finish. So I'm going to go ahead and pour some today. Now, when it comes down to tasting, all the things you see the so-called expert do that make it look so cool really only comes down to three things. And we're going to walk you through it today with this wine and with the red. It's all really, in order to look like an expert, or in my opinion, what I call a snob, it just comes down to three things. You want to look at it, you want to sniff it, and you want to sip it. So let's take a look at this wine. This is, you can hold it up to the light or hold it up to a white napkin or a piece of paper, but I see sort of a pale straw color. If I swirl it a little bit, I can get an idea of how well it coats the glass, how consistent that coating is. That can give you an idea of how viscous the wine is or how much alcohol is in it. But it's about what I would expect from a Chardonnay, is a nice, pale, consistent color. And you want to get a sniff. Now, you just put your nose right in there and go for it. Yeah, and I definitely get the vanilla or the honey, a little bit of maybe a fresh straw flavor from it, and a nice sort of fruity pleasantness behind it too. And after you've done your sniff, of course, you take a sip. Now, don't make it a big sip, just a nice medium sip, and don't be in a hurry to swallow it. Yeah, let it wash over your mouth, down the back of your tongue, and then go ahead and swallow it. And then give it a minute for that finish to come out. What's the finish? That's that sort of lingering flavor afterwards. It's the aftertaste of the wine, which can be quite pleasant and really complements the big fruit that you took down your mouth. Scott, what did you think of the Chardonnay today?
It's very good. I like the oaky taste with it, the buttery finish on it.
Yeah.
We've drank this wine a number of times, and it's one of my favorites.
Great. And Maestro, are you still with us? Can you tell us what you think of the Chardonnay?
I am indeed with you. Let me, if you don't mind, I'll swirl it around a little bit, and I can see that it's coating a little bit. Not a great deal, but that's okay. Maybe it's the glass that I'm using, but it gets a little bit of that. And now let me see if I can get the aroma of it. Very nice. And now the most important part for me, at least.
Absolutely.
Delicious. Absolutely delicious. And as you may know, I'm not a big fan of reds because of the tannins and all that kind of stuff that make it a little more hardcore. But this, to me, delicious. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks. I appreciate that. So let's move on to our second wine. We've picked out a double black Zinfandel. This is a Paso Robles wine. And both of these wines, by the way, are very, very affordable and approachable in terms of price. We got these from Total Wine. Both of these are $15 or less. So if you're thinking, boy, you got to really lay out a lot of money for great wine, you actually don't. You just have to spend a little time thinking about what you want to get. Ask your wine merchant for help in the wine that you want to try, and let them know your budget, and you can find some great wines for a very respectable price. So Zinfandel, this one is from the Paso region. Zinfandel is known as perhaps the only indigenous grape to California. Most of the grapes in red wines and white wines that you drink, even if they're grown and vinted in California, the grapes originally came from other countries like France or Spain or Germany or even Australia. But Zinfandel is thought to be the only one that's indigenous, and it's become a very popular wine in California, and for good reason. So let's pour a little bit of this. Now you may notice I'm using a bigger glass. Typically, when you pour the wine, you want to pour it to the widest portion of the glass, particularly with red wines, because you want to get the maximum exposure to air. Air equals aging, and air will help you mellow the wine. So let's do our 3 steps. First, let's take a look at it. Now, we've got some pictures of why looking at a red wine is kind of a good idea. As you might see, I don't know if, Paul, we can bring up that picture or not. Well, there's a lot of pictures. So some of these are from my wine travels around the world. But if you take a look, not quite that one right there, when you can tilt the glass a little bit and put it against a white background, you can see how right at the edge, the color tends to thin out a little bit. And that very edge where it almost becomes clear is called the ring. And so when the experts, or snobs as I think of myself, do that, they look at the ring, and the ring can tell you a few things about the wine, starting with how young or old the wine is relative to its harvest date. It can also give you an idea of the the clarity of the wine, and a little bit about the consistency of things. Just like with the white wine, you can swirl around for viscosity. You do the same thing. Now, a younger wine will have a very, very pure color, and it will just sort of fade to clear. But as wines age, they can tend to get a little different color on the ring. And if wines go bad, this is something people are always worried about. If I open a bottle of wine at a restaurant that doesn't taste good, how do I know if it's just me or I don't like the wine or the wine's bad? If that ring is turning orange or brownish or dark, and it's not a particularly old wine, then that wine may be oxidized. And if you then, after looking at it, go on to take your sniff, and you get sort of a wet cardboard or forest floor or dirty sock smell, then you may not have a good wine, and you should bring your wine steward back and ask them to take a look at it. What I get when I smell this is a classic Zinfandel. I get sort of ripe plums, maybe roasted cherries. And Zinfandel is best known for its sort of peppery spice, and I get a nice hint of that on this. So we did the look, we did the sniff. As Steve said, let's do the best part. Let's take a sip. Yeah, that's really nice. I get a nice viscosity over the tongue. I really get some ripe, intense fruit flavor out of it. Stephen mentioned tannins before in red wines, and this red wine is not particularly tannic. Sometimes you'll open up a Cabernet Sauvignon, and that grape is well known for having really heavy tannins. This one, not so much. And because it's a California wine, it's also made to be drunk pretty much right when you buy it. You don't have to age it very much. So this wine is great. It's ready to go. I think it's got a nice, rich flavor. Maestro, what did you think of this Zinfandel?
Well, I'll let you know in just a second. Let me.
Okay.
Sure, I can see the ring there. Yeah, I do.
Yep.
Excellent. And it's not orange. That's a good sign.
Very good.
All right. And the nose. That's kind of a mild nose to me. Not overpowering in any way, shape, or form. Very nice.
Sometimes Zins can come out much bigger than that. This one, I think, is very well balanced.
Yeah, very nice. And then finally, oh, that's delicious. A lot of flavor to it. And you're right about the little peppery finish to it also. Delicious. Yeah. Very good. This is great.
Thanks. And Scott, why don't you tell us what you think about the wine, and then you can take it from there about how you might pair these wines.
Well, Double Black is one of my all-time favorite Zins. It's a very inexpensive wine, under $20, and you can find a lot of really good wines under $20. It goes with it. You get a total wine, where I get all my wines, and just love the wine. But let me go now into my favorite part of wine drinking, pairing the wine with food. A good pairing changes an entire meal. The taste just explodes in your mouth. I mean, picture something like the difference between having a plain steak and one with mushrooms and grilled onions on it, if you like mushrooms and grilled onions, or a scoop of plain ice cream versus one with toppings on it. It changes the whole flavor, just enhances it. Now, I want to get rid of one of the misconceptions that there are about pairing wine. Forget about white with fish, red with meat. It's not the protein that you're pairing the wine with, it's the flavor. It's the sauces and the seasonings that are important. So you want to look at that as far as how you pair something. For example, if I just have a plain steak off the grill, I'm going to pair it with a cab. It's the heartiest wine for a good red meat. However, if I'm going to have sauce on that steak, I'm going to get something else, something like a Petit Syrah or a Malbec. Someone has a little bit more fruit flavors to me in it, and that pairs actually much better. We talked about the Chard before. Let's talk about the wines we had today. The Chard, there are two types of Chards. There's an oaky Chard, which is settled in fermented in barrels, wooden barrels, and then there's a steel Chard, which is in steel casks. And an oaky Chard is going to be more vanilla. It's going to be better with cheese or with richer white sauces. you'd have the oaky, buttery taste with it. A steel shard you'd have with something like shellfish or steamed or lightly grilled fish. Again, you match the flavor of the wine with the flavor of the food. The Zin that we just had, Zin is wonderful. You go through it a lot because Zin is perfect with Italian food, along with Sangiovese, an Italian grape, and also barbecue. It's about the only wine that really goes with barbecue because of peppery stuff in it. Others wines, try them. See what goes with it. See how you're cooking it, what the spices are, what the sauces are, and experiment. You can go on Google and put in, someone just put down with sage gravy. I would put in, and that's going to be your big flavor, the sage gravy. I would put into Google, what wine goes with sage gravy? And it'll give you a number of suggestions on a couple of sites. Try them. See what you like. Everybody has a different palate, but see which wines you like and experiment and make notes. In fact, in our recipes at home, my wife's recipes, we put down the wines that really go with it. One more example. Salmon is like the perfect example. My wife makes a homemade baked salmon with her own homemade tartar sauce. We use an oaky shard for that because there's not a lot of flavoring and sauces, anything on the salmon. It's more even, without a lot. However, she also makes a salmon with a maple syrup sauce, which is a much stronger flavor. And for that, we use a light Pinot because we want the fruit of the Pinot to kind of blend in with the maple syrup. That's an example how the same dish can change depending on what the sauces are that goes with it. But try what you like and make notes of it and enjoy it. But always have a wine with food. It absolutely changes the whole flavor of your meal.
That's great, Scott. Thanks, Scott. I was just thinking that one of the greatest parts about pairing food and wine is that, if you try a wine with your favorite dish and you think it's good, but it wasn't quite great, you get to do it again. So just go out and buy another bottle of wine and try it again and keep experimenting. And as to Scott's wife's salmon, I've had both of those dishes and they're phenomenal. And we've probably had 6 or 7 different wines with each of them, and it's quite a pleasure to go through those. Steve, do you have questions for us, or have we got any questions in from the audience that you want to bring out?
I do indeed. In fact, this one's kind of a specific one, but somebody asked, since we were trying these various wines and we've got the names of them, and we know that La Crema is called La Crema. What kind of food would you suggest with that specific Chardonnay that we tasted today?
Sure.
Anything that would go with a buttery, goes with a buttery shard, like we talked about a little bit earlier. Things with cheeses, rich white sauces. That really will pair very nicely with it.
All right, and I have this question because people have given me, bottles of wine over the years, and I'm not that much of a wine drinker myself, and so I end up having these bottles laying around. What would you suggest, either one of you, maybe Steve, maybe Scott, please, where do you store your bottles of wine if you don't have the exact proper refrigeration? Any ideas for helping?
Well, first, Steve, if you have more wine than you need, call me.
And me.
Okay.
We'll help you out. But no, there's not a real huge secret to wine storage in general. The best place to store your wine is a dedicated wine cooler, which will maintain temperature at about 55 degrees. That's the same temperature as the caves in France. And so that's how that came from. So the experience of the French winemakers has been 55 degrees with moderate humidity is a pretty good thing to do. If you can't do that, all is not lost. The best advice is store your wine away from windows and sunlight and store it away from things like heater vents. So keep it at room temperature or cooler. If you can find the back of a closet, say, where they're not going to get sunlight, you can store a red wine or a white wine easily for 6 to 24 months, and it'll be just fine. If you want to go longer than that, then you should really look at more specific solutions like a wine cooler. However, the good news here is that even a small wine cooler that will hold a dozen or 2 dozen bottles of wine is an investment of maybe $100 to $200 or more. The other end of the spectrum is you can do what I did and go nuts, and that is I had a custom wine cooler made. I keep in my living room. It's 10 feet tall, and it holds over 400 bottles of wine, and I have almost 400 bottles of wine in it. that's not the starter point. That's if you're really a real snob like me and you want to keep a lot of wine.
Well, maybe if I can interrupt, maybe you're not the guy for me to give away my excess bottles to. As a matter of fact, perhaps Scott would enjoy it more.
I got 3 coolers myself in the house.
Now,
Also, for storing wine, store it on its side. That's very important because it keeps the cork moist with it. And never, ever store it in your garage, especially in California.
too hot. Yeah. Yeah. One more quick question, and then I want to go on because I want to hear Scott's group again. I had a chance to preview it earlier, and it's going to be just a great thing to see and for you to hear. But one more question about French wine versus California wine and year of production and place of production and all those kinds of things. It seems like it would be a lot of work to understand all the issues associated with that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I've been studying wine since 2002, and I haven't even scratched the surface yet. So yeah, it could be a lifetime's dedication or distraction, depending on where your priorities are. But basically, the best way to really learn about wines without having to spend a lot of time on classes or books is to go to a good wine store or even someplace like Cost Plus or Trader Joe's, where they have very inexpensive wines from all over the world, and buy a few bottles and try them. And you'll find out that there are styles based on the country of origin that are fairly consistent. French wines tend to be a bit more robust in terms of structure and those tannins we were talking about, more earthy, sometimes they're called. Spanish wines tend to be wines that need to be aged for quite a while, because Spain tends to make wines, and Italy does too, that are not meant to be consumed right after the bottling. And they'll make some very, very strong flavors as well. White wines in California, we talked about the buttery chard. That is the California style. We didn't talk much about a Chardonnay that's made where it's aged in stainless steel, and that is more of a French style, where the oakiness doesn't appear so much, and you get a crisper wine, which could go, I think someone asked about where you would pair that, could go with something like a pear salad or some other sort of lighter fare that might have candied walnuts in it or something like that. So to try to tell you everything, Steve, would be longer than the show that we have, but the best thing you can do is go have some fun, buy a few bottles for $7, $8, $9, and open them up and see what happens. It's a great experience.
If I could jump in here, where I learned wine 10, 15 years, 20 years ago was at Total Wine in Bevmo. When the pandemic is over, they have tastings, usually on Fridays, especially Total Wine also has very inexpensive classes that you can go in and learn all about these wines, and it's all based on different regions or different types of wine. Rule of thumb as far as California versus Europe, most European wines need food. The majority of them need food because they have like an earthy taste to it very often, and that's what they're made for. California wines are more to drink on their own. But again, it's going to be your personal taste, which ones you like best. And like Steve said, try them, learn about them.
That's great. All right. So
one more thing, if I could, Steve. I think Susan asked a question about storing red wines versus white wines. Let me just sort of cover off on that quickly. How you store the wines for red or white are the same, meaning you want to keep them in a cool place away from the sun on their side. How you prepare the wine for service is where you have a difference between white wines and red wines. White wines, like I said before, you want to chill them for a bit down to about 40, 45, or maybe 50 degrees. Red wines you want to serve at room temperature. And bear in mind that room temperature in this context means room temperature in France. France is a little cooler usually than, say, California. So room temperature in France is usually between 68 and 70 degrees. Now, it's not that critical if you just want to keep the wines, in a dark area and then take it out and it's 70, 72 degrees in your home, you're going to have a great time with it. If you have maybe a more intense wine or a wine that maybe comes from France or Spain, you can put it in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes before you serve it, and you'll be good to go. It'll be great. Probably the only other big thing to think about is that a red wine, typically you want to open it 15, 20, 30 minutes before you serve it. The older the wine, the more early you want to open it up so that it has a chance to mix with the air and the flavor can open up. White wines, it's not as critical.
That's great. Thank you so much for clarifying some of these things to the both of you for a very informative session on wine. But I do want to move on to music, and we've got something great to hear. Scott, do you mind telling us a little bit about what we're going to hear? And thank you, Steve, for your contribution. We'll see you a little bit later. Scott, please go right ahead.
Thank you. Well, besides wine, my number one job is I'm the director of the Pacoima Singers, which are at the Pacoima Middle School Film, Media, and Performing Arts Magnet. We are a hidden treasure, one of the original 10 magnets made in LUSD in 1979. So we've been there that long. I've been there for 28 years now. We have 5 award-winning production departments: musical theater, dance, drama, film production, which uses professional Hollywood-style cameras and software, what the studios use. And we have a stage crew which operates a Broadway caliber professional auditorium, unlike almost every other school around. The Pacoima Singers are made of 30, 12, 13, and 14-year-olds. And I want you to remember that when you watch this video. They're 12, 13, 14-year-olds. We annually travel around the country on tour before the pandemic. We go all over North America, usually Washington, D.C. and Vancouver, Canada. We've been to Chicago and Cleveland, where we performed at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And if you have a child that you know of in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade who's looking for a great arts program in the fall, we do have some limited opening for 6th, 7th, 8th grade in the fall. What you're about to see is a part of a medley from Mary Poppins, the Broadway Mary Poppins, not the movie. The choreography is created and actually taught by the students based on the actual Broadway choreography and taken from there. So without further ado, here are the Pacoima Singers.
We'll step in time. We will step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. We will step in time. Over the rooftop. Step in time. Over the rooftop. Step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Over the rooftop, step in time. Watch me step, but step in time. Watch me step, but step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Watch me step, but step in time. Kick your knees up, step in time. Kick your knees up, step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Kick your knees up, step in time. Child was a step in time. Parents was the same. Never miss a chance to get it right. Don't seem a perfect rhyme. Don't seem a shame. When the steps are going as smoothly as they might. That's me step in time. That's me step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. That's me step in time. Link your elbow, step in time. Link your elbow, step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Link your elbow, step in time. Link your elbow, step in time. Kick your knees up, step in time. Kick your knees up, step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Kick your knees up, step in time. Oh, step in time. Step, 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 step in time. Step, step, step. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. If you kick your knees up, kick your knees up, kick your knees up, kick your knees up, step in time.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. When trying to express oneself, frankly quite absurd, truly through lengthy lexicon to find the perfect word. Only through spontaneity keeps conversation keen. You need to find a way to say precisely what you mean. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Even though the sound of it is something quite atrocious, if you say it loud enough, you'll always sound precocious.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I'm
portion instead 16 fowls as well, and cook them in an order which is very odd to spell.
Well, thank you, Scott. That was just great. Excellent. And now I'd like to put sort of a bookend on the today's show. We opened up with Gershwin, of course. Then we had guitars, then the Gran Cru, the wine, and then, of course, Mary Poppins Too. And now we'd like to close with another Gershwin piece. This is from the Chicago performance, the Los Angeles Symphonic Winds, with Dale Underwood performing on saxophone. Well, that was such a thrill for the LA Winds to be part of that wonderful program. And thank you all for joining us today. Before I bring on our guest from today for the final wave goodbye, I'd like to remind you that in 2 weeks, we have a very special program lined up for you. We're calling it Two Co-Principals and Two Legal Eagles. So we'll have our co-principal flutist, Juan Rivera, performing, our co-principal horn player, Jason Beaumont, performing for you, and then we'll have an attorney from the band, Mark Marcus, talking about a number of important issues that I'm sure you'll find fascinating, as well as Paula Savastano, who deals with royalties and how musicians are actually paid and what goes on with that, and things I think you'll find very fascinating. So that's in 2 weeks. So now let's bring on everybody from today's show, and thank you all for watching, and thank you all. Thank you, Steve, for participating. Thank you, Scott, for participating and bringing your fine group, and Joel for your fine performance. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Long.